We are here with Amber Sparks and Emily Hazelwood of Blue Latitudes, and they're explorers, scientists, divers, entrepreneurs. Tell me about your interest in the ocean.
I'm Emily, and I grew up on the seacoast of New Hampshire. It's a very small seacoast, only up 13 miles. So I grew up with a lot of exposure to the ocean and a love of the ocean. My dad was a big diver. He got us diving very young. I always knew I wanted to have a career in the ocean. So when I graduated from college, I went on to work on the BP oil spill as a field tech. During that time, I was basically a glorified dishwasher. I was doing biota sampling and sediment sampling and trying to understand the impact of the oil spill on the area. And it was there that the fishermen would just talk about how incredible these oil platforms were for fishing, which at the time seemed just bizarre because here we are cleaning up, and trying to understand the impact of one of the largest oil spills of all time, and they're saying these are awesome spots for fishing. So that kind of piqued my interest. So when I went to graduate school at Scripps Institution of Oceanography, I knew that I wanted to study those oil platforms and understand what those impacts, besides being all negative on the environment, might be. Maybe they have a positive impact on these ecosystems there. And that's where I met Amber.
Yeah, we met in graduate school, and those are our pups. My passion for the ocean really began in my childhood. I grew up in Orange County, took that curiosity into my undergraduate. I went to UC Berkeley and studied marine science, and while I was at UC Berkeley, I was really fascinated with what they call bench science. So I would go and look at barnacles and take things into the lab, and we were running genetic tests and doing all this stuff that I really enjoyed, but I realized I didn't want to sit on the bench for the rest of my life looking at barnacles. I wanted to explore more of the oceans and be able to communicate what I was doing and why a healthy ocean is important. So after I graduated, I got a job with Google and Google Oceans, and what they're doing there is they're basically taking these stories in ocean science and communicating them to the public through their tools of Google Maps and Google Earth. So one of the exciting things that we did while I was there is we launched what they call Underwater Street View, where you can virtually dive along a coral reef and all these pop-ups come at you. It's really an immersive, cool experience to show people what the ocean is and to share with them exciting stories in the ocean. And that's when I met Emily, and she started telling me about these oil platforms off the coastline that had these thriving reefs. And I thought, wow, that is a communication challenge if I've ever heard of one. How can I explain to my grandmother or to my friends that an oil platform has a benefit for the environment? Is that even true? Is this a valuable ecosystem? Does it provide the kind of services that we should keep in our oceans long term after the oil production is done? And we started our company Blue Latitudes that works with offshore oil and gas companies and governments to help them look at their platforms on a case-by-case basis and determine which ones would make good reefs.
So there's 450 oil rigs in the Gulf of Mexico, right? And they're on board, right? With
It's a very different story in the Gulf of Mexico. In California, we have 27 offshore oil and gas platforms. None of them have been reefed. And they found, through a lot of research being done at UC Santa Barbara and other areas, that these are some of the most productive ecosystems on the planet. More productive than estuaries, marshes, coral reefs, which is just crazy. But we're not reefing any of our platforms. But in the Gulf of Mexico, it's a very different story. They have hundreds of oil platforms. They've reefed between 500 and 600 platforms. As I shared earlier, these fishermen are going out there on the weekends. They love these platforms. They understand the value of these platforms when it comes to contributing to a healthy ecosystem. And because we have this research in California, but people just aren't really familiar with the program, that's kind of what really sparked our interest on trying to understand why we don't have a Rick's Reefs program here in California.
Yeah, it's amazing to me that there's so many fish species and it's great diving. I've read all about it, but explain to the viewer what exactly it means to repurpose the oil rig.
The basis of it is that they seal and cap the well where they've been doing all the drilling and remove all the drilling infrastructure. So that well is going to be sealed and capped the exact same way, whether this platform is reefed or it's completely removed. And the oil companies retain the liability for that well in perpetuity. So should there ever be a leak or anything like that, the oil company is always responsible.
Right.
But then there's this massive infrastructure, like the scaffolding of a building. And some of them range from 200 feet to down to over 1,000 feet of water. So these are massive structures. Imagine like the Empire State Building, but it's just scaffolding. And that's the platform jacket, and that's where all the marine life has been growing since that platform was put on the seafloor. Because marine life is attracted to hard substrate in the ocean. And so to repurpose that platform, what they do is they usually cut it down to about 80 feet below the sea surface. And that allows for ships to safely draft over. And then that structure is donated to the local parks and wildlife, whether that's Louisiana, Texas, California, and that Department of Fish and Wildlife will manage that structure as they would any other artificial reef. So in California, we have Shipwreck Alley. Down in San Diego, we are throwing rubble off of Palos Verdes. We're making all these artificial reefs, and the Department of Fish and Wildlife manages those reefs, and so they would manage this oil platform reef in the same way they would any of those other structures.
And it's hard to talk about rigs to reefs without talking about the importance of reefs and without talking about some of the damage that we've seen with some of our nearshore reefs and why these reefs are important. So you really have to talk about it hand in hand. And plus, if you want to understand the Rigs to Reefs program, you need to understand why this marine life is attracted and producing on these structures. So I'd say it depends on the audience. If we're talking to kindergartners, we're going to talk about it very differently than if we're talking to a college-based audience. But in general, we talk about both in hand in hand.
Okay, yeah. And so right now there's still oil rigs where they just cut it off and then remove everything.
Well, many structures are not actually great reefs. Maybe they've been placed in an area that doesn't have, maybe it's really sedimented, so it doesn't have a lot of marine life that's going to be attracted to it. And in those cases, those platforms should be completely removed once they're done producing oil. So I think there's been almost like 500 to 600 platforms that have been reefed, and the majority of them are in the Gulf of Mexico. But many platforms are just typically completely removed once they're done producing oil.
Right. So yours is a case by case, which makes sense.
Yeah.
So if there was no reef there, it would all be removed.
It should be
Right.
removed. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And then when everything is going well and the rig has turned into this beautiful reef with life, and then they remove the top portion of it, how risky is it then that there will be oil leakage because they really shut it off, right?
Yeah. So when you reef or totally remove a platform, the process is exactly the same. So the well gets sealed and capped in the exact same way. So the risk of an oil spill it's there forever. Once you drill an oil well, there's a possibility there could be a spill. But whether or not you reef or totally decommission and remove a platform, it doesn't increase the chances at all, which is a good thing. And that's a question we get a lot, so I'm glad that you asked that.
Right. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I can't believe what a magical thing, like you say on your website, a silver lining in something that's not good, that we all use so much oil and we have oil rigs, but then there's a silver lining that there's. Yeah. And so I'm just shocked that California isn't on board. And plus you have all the major, Patagonia, Mission Blue. Mm-hmm. How do you work with Mission Blue? Because they're such a known environmental organization as well.
Yeah, so. Absolutely. Well, when we first started our company, we had such a nonprofit mission in many ways, but becoming a nonprofit is really challenging. It's very expensive up front, and it takes almost like a year to process all the paperwork with the federal and state government. So we became a limited liability company, but we still wanted to apply for grants and have the benefit of being a nonprofit. So we partnered with Mission Blue under what they call fiscal partnership. So we were able to apply for grants and accept donations, and the money would funnel through Mission Blue, and Mission Blue would take a percentage, and then it would support the education, outreach, and exploration research initiatives that we were doing. So they really were a major partner in supporting us almost, I think we had that partnership for almost 4 or 5 years, and then just this year we founded our own nonprofit, the Blue Latitudes Foundation. So it took us a while to get there, but now that we're here, we're really excited about it, and we're able to function as our own nonprofit now. But Mission Blue gave us that platform to stand on, and Mission Blue's fearless leader, Dr. Sylvia Earle, who's known as her deepness and kind of the female Jacques Cousteau of the ocean, it supports Rigs to Reef here in California. So it's been really great to have her endorsement on this program.
Yeah, I mean, when you look, it seems like I said, all the big names support it. So then the question is, then who doesn't, and why isn't it getting, why isn't it happening in California just yet?
Yeah, and there is a lot of really big environmental groups that don't support it. I'd say, the Sierra Club is one of them, Surfrider is one of them, because they have a very hard line of they want to see the oceans go back to the way they were 2,000, 3,000 years ago. That's a very pure conservationist attitude, and they're not wrong. I'd love to see the oceans the way they were 3,000 years ago, but we're more dealing with the reality of what the oceans look like now, and the reality of we all drive cars, we use plastics in our lives, we're relying on these oil platforms, and we contribute to them being there. And many also, they see it as sort of an alliance with big oil, is by letting them get out of having to take these oil platforms out, letting them just keep them in place. So that's where a lot of the other environmental groups are anti-rigs to reefs. And we're trying to, be more working across the aisle. We totally understand and we respect their positions because we need people like that.
Right.
But we're trying to work going across the aisle and work on both sides.
Right. Do you see that the oil companies are caring about the environment too when you talk to them?
Surprisingly, yes, actually. So I think what gets the oil companies' interest initially is the cost savings. So removing a platform completely from the seafloor can be incredibly costly, and if they only have to remove the upper 80 feet, they save a lot of money, right? But the Rigs to Reef law mandates that 50% of that cost savings goes back to the state into an endowment for marine preservation and conservation, which funds the Department of Fish and Wildlife, the management of these reefs. It funds research in the state. It's a really great thing. But so that's really what draws them in initially. But then when they start to learn about the reefs that have been growing there, they become really, in our experience, they become really passionate and excited about the work that's being done. It's sort of a feel-good for them in an industry that's not full of many feel-goods. And we've actually had a few oil and gas clients who've given us some of their best real underwater footage. So they'll go through maybe some ROV footage from many years ago and find one where a sperm whale comes in, or where they see really a really alien looking fish or something. They share it with us because they're like, wow, dude, look at this. What species is this? Isn't this cool? So, I mean, that curiosity and that passion is really there. And I think it starts from understanding the goals of the Rigs to Reef program and being excited about it.
Who do you guys also think is doing great work?
I think Patagonia as a company and their founder, he is absolutely someone I admire. Everything from their worn wear, so taking in articles of clothing and repurposing them to be new articles of clothing, to manufacturing their clothing to be maybe a little bit higher of a price, but it'll last you forever. And if it doesn't, you can take it back in and they'll fix it, or they'll contribute it to the worn wear. And I think as a company to have a mission like that, that's very forward thinking. It's not just thinking about tomorrow, it's thinking about 100 years from now. And then, they're also a company, as Amber mentioned, we've received multiple grants from them, and we've also started a petition on their Patagonia Action Works page that will help hopefully save rigs to reefs in California. But so for them to recognize what we're doing and support us means a lot to us as a company, but it means they're also very forward thinking. The environmental grants program is incredible.
Right. And lastly, I like to, talking about women entrepreneurs, and, you're going to these all men corporations, right, with big oil companies. And I really like that you spun a positive message out of it again in some of the interviews that I've seen, where you say it's actually can be an advantage, because an advantage, and it's harder because all eyes are on you. I really enjoyed. So tell me about presenting to all men.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of power to being the only female in the room, and people take notice, and that gives you a spotlight versus if you're in a sea of all women and it's, you know, you kind of blend into the background a little bit more. People tend to be more interested when you're the only one there. But I think we've absolutely made a name for ourselves that we can justify with our research and the work that we've done, and we've really received a really positive reception from both the scientific communities and the oil and gas communities. So there's absolutely power to being the only woman in the room.
Amazing, amazing. So, well, good work, wonderful work. I'm sure I could talk to you for hours about diving and the ocean, but I really appreciate. We'll dive in even more in the article. But thank you so much for
Thank
your
you for
time.
having us.
Really
Thanks.
appreciate it. So.